So I'm going to do a segment here for you, which is the top 10 reasons why you should vote for and support Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic primary. Now, I want to be clear about something up front. This is specifically for people who, fancy themselves a social democrat or a democratic socialist. If that's your ideology, then I really hope you'll watch this video, you'll pay attention to this video, and, you'll see why this is really an empirical question. This is really an objective question. There's not much room for, subjectivity. This isn't like picking your favorite flavor of bagel or something. It's not arbitrary. So we're going to get into that. Now, also, let me say, I have, for people who might have stumbled across this video who are actively supporting Elizabeth Warren at this moment, I got nothing against you. I got nothing against her. Again, I just want to lay it out in a very clear, digestible way because, in my opinion, as somebody who's been following politics for quite a long time, when you're picking a candidate, the three most important things, their proposed policies, so what do they want to do, their record, which is what have they done, also an under-discussed thing, which is massively important, their strategy. How will they go about getting said things implemented? And then obviously you could also throw in there a very basic thing like honesty. But really, those are the four criteria that make the most sense in my mind. Policies, record, and strategy being so just vitally important. And I guess it's a little frustrating to me that I stumble across many people who none of those things are the things that they're actually voting on. I tweeted something the other day that went like semi-viral where I asked people, rank your top 5 candidates as if we had ranked choice voting. And you'd be surprised. So everybody who's been listening to this show for a long time, they had their candidates and they had a logic that made sense as to, this is why I want this one number 1, this is why I want this one number 2. But then when the tweet, expanded beyond just the people who were already part of the Secular Talk audience, there were things that you just simply could not, have an understandable, ideological, policy-driven reason for why they had the list the way they did. And I'm talking about people who were like, well, number 1, Elizabeth Warren, number 2, Kamala, number 3, Mayor Pete. It's like, well, hold on now. You're picking candidates who are representing very different parts of the political spectrum, and you're hopping over other candidates who nominally agree with the person you have in first a lot more. That simply makes no sense. That makes absolutely no sense if you're using any kind of logical, understandable criteria to determine who you want to vote for. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump into it. So number 1, and a lot of people don't remember this, she voted for Ben Carson to be the head of Housing and Urban Development. Now, after a giant, gargantuan, legendary political backlash from everybody who was a supporter of hers, she flipped in the next round of votes. But in the first round of voting, she thought, yeah, Ben Carson for the head of Housing and Urban Development. Why? I have no earthly idea, and neither do you. And that's incredibly concerning. Because every now and then, she'll throw something at you that's out of left field that you're like, whoa, what have you done? Excuse you? Ben Carson for that Housing and Urban Development? That is the simplest no vote of all time. So, the lesson we take away from this is either poor political instincts, where every now and then she wanders into a minefield, or, and I actually think this is a little more likely, her instincts aren't necessarily that bad, but it's so easy to talk her out of the position that she would originally come to, which is usually not that bad. And another good example of this is she was asked, hey, this was right after we got the news from Donna Brazile, where Donna Brazile said, yeah, the Bernie supporters are kind of right. The DNC was acting as an arm of the Hillary Clinton campaign, and they weren't being fair to Bernie Sanders. And so Elizabeth Warren was asked on TV on, I think it was either CNN or MSNBC, so was the primary rigged? And she was like, well, yeah, of course. It's just super simple, obvious, and, everybody on the left was giving her credit, like, oh, good, you're recognizing something that they don't want you to recognize in Washington, D.C., and you're correct. Well, fast forward a few days later, she goes out and she's, I misspoke. It wasn't rigged. Rigged is too strong a word. So what that is her instincts were correct. Then she got behind closed doors. Her staffers lashed into her, and she immediately flipped her position to the wrong position, which shows either bad political instincts or it's easy to coach her out of her good political instincts because she'll listen to her advisors, and her advisors, as Democratic advisors have shown us for the past 3 or 4 decades, are terrible. So that's reason number one. A random vote out of nowhere for Ben Carson to be the head of Housing and Urban Development, which shows like every now and then she'll drop a bomb on you and you're like, whoa, what did you just do? Why? Why did you do that? That's not something you see Bernie Sanders do. He never surprises you like that. Reason number two. One of these candidates wants to fully eliminate medical debt, $81 billion worth of it, which is all of it, and one of these candidates doesn't. Now, that's not a little thing. That's not a little thing. Honestly, we could have a long conversation on this issue alone. Bernie totally outflanks Elizabeth Warren and is just eons better. Because there are over 500,000 Americans that go bankrupt as a result of medical bills. Medical bankruptcies is not a thing in other developed countries. So one of the candidates says, let's totally eliminate medical debt, and the other one hasn't said that. That's huge, guys. That's not little. Number three, one of them wants to eliminate all student loan debt. The other one doesn't. The other one has a plan to eliminate some student loan debt, but it ain't all of it. So that's another giant difference. And what you're going to see here is a trend of Elizabeth Warren doing what honestly was one of Obama's biggest flaws, which is concede up front a little bit. Because obviously the Republican position is going to be, how about we eliminate absolutely none of it and you piss off? That's going to be their position. So when you start the negotiation from you saying, okay, let's only eliminate some of it, you already conceded up front. And you're much less likely to get any change at all. There's an old saying, if you shoot for the stars, you might reach the moon. You know, this is a dynamic that we see is vitally important, even in something like when you go to purchase a car, where you want to go into the negotiation repping your position. If it says, let's say it's a used car, it says $10,000 on the sticker, you want to go in there and say, I'll give you 6. You don't want to go in there Elizabeth Warren style and say, maybe I'll give you 9. No, you want to negotiate the proper way. So, again, this isn't a close issue. She doesn't want to eliminate all student loan debt. He does. Giant. Okay, what are we on now? The fourth one? I'm going to forget the count here, and that's okay, because this is in no particular order, but it's really important. One of these candidates voted for Trump's incredibly bloated military budget, and one of them didn't. And just so everybody knows, this military budget was so gargantuan and so obnoxious, it had more money in it than Donald Trump was even asking for. I think he asked for a $60 billion increase, and they gave him an $80 billion increase or something to that effect. Maybe even been a $100 billion increase. But Elizabeth Warren voted for a gargantuan criminal military budget to go to our man-baby-in-chief, a guy who shouldn't have his finger anywhere near that red button, a guy who shouldn't be in control of a military. You would think the logical position would be, hell no, I'm not voting for this guy to be the commander-in-chief of this even larger military than it was before. Why would I give him billions more to play around with? Well, she voted yes on that military budget. Bernie Sanders did not. So important, guys. One of these candidates has raised a tremendous amount of money from the military-industrial complex and done favors for them. Guess what, guys? Raytheon is headquartered in Massachusetts. So, you know, there's been extensive reporting on how Elizabeth Warren has indeed done favors for Raytheon and the military-industrial complex. The other one has not. The other one has not raised money from them and not done any favors for them. The next. One of these candidates waffled on Medicare for all until very recently, and the other one never has.
When you say Medicare for all, do you mean, for example, the bill that you've co-signed onto in the Senate, or do you think it could also mean Medicare buy-in, et cetera?
So I support Medicare for all. I have for a very long time. And I believe that there are lots of ways to get there. So for example, even in the bill that I've co-sponsored with Bernie and others, it's got a 4-year period in it. It's got different ways that ramp in. It's got some groups that never get into it. For example, veterans will always have a separate healthcare system. There are a lot of different ways that people talk about it and have introduced into Congress. Some are actual bills. Some have just talked about it. We could start lowering the age. So you could do it rather than just saying how it is we're going to build the ramp. You could build the ramp by saying 60 years old is the age for Medicare, 55, 50, or you could do it the other way. Everybody under 30 is covered, then everybody under 35, then everybody under 40. Different ways to move into the system. But there is one thing I would really like to underline here. First is the principle, and that is where we're aiming as Democrats, and that is that every single human being in this country is covered by healthcare at a price they can afford, that healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights. And I would like to contrast that with the Republican Party that's not having this conversation about the best ways to get there, but instead is still out there actively working to try to take away healthcare from tens of millions of Americans. So there are a lot of times I'm proud to be a Democrat, but when we're talking about healthcare, this is one of the biggest distinctions in something that would directly touch the lives of pretty much everybody in this country. And I like where the Democrats are on this. But at the end of the day, I know what the center is. And the center is that we have high quality access for every single person.
Oh, no, see, what you need to understand is Republicans bad, Democrats good, and you have all these plans that all these different Democrats have, and the core of it is the same, which is we want to get universal coverage. So, whether it's Medicare for All, or Medicare for All Extra, or Medicare for America, or a public option, or any of these are all, oh my God, the core of it is so wonderful, and the Democrats are fighting for the right thing, and the Republicans are fighting for the wrong thing. Now, that is, if you follow this stuff closely, you know that is just factually untrue. That 90% of the healthcare plans proposed by other Democrats are simply attempts to continue to protect the profits of the health insurance industry in the status quo. It's let's do some tweaks around the edges and maybe get a couple more people coverage, but we're still going to have the core of the system be for-profit health insurance companies existing and controlling the markets. And, of course, screwing people over because that's what they do. Their whole business model is, the more people I deny care, the more money I make. So having the profit motive involved in health insurance is a problem in and of itself. Now, recently, her rhetoric, especially in debates, has been much more strongly in favor of Medicare for All, and that's her trying to assuage left-wing fears to try to say, no, I'm totally like this guy Bernie, right? I mean, the Medicare for All, sure. She released her specific plan, guys. I kid you not. There's not a single place where it says single payer, which, by the way, is exactly what Medicare for All is, a single payer. The government is the single insurer. Doesn't say that anywhere in her bill, and it also uses the weasel words of increased access to health care. So now you might think that's a small thing. I do not. When one candidate waffles on Medicare for All and the other one never has, that tells me she's less likely to pursue it, but even beyond that, even if she does pursue it, it's not like she's going to waste a lot of political capital and really go to the mat to try to get it implemented. She's already signaled up front, I'm willing to give away the farm and go to a lesser bill, which she thinks might have a better chance of passing. Because, hey, all the Democrats are at the same position anyway, right? All these plans are pretty good anyway, right? No, they're not. Either the Bernie bill or the Jayapal bill, which are both different versions of Medicare for All single payer, and that's it. Those are the only ones that are really going to fundamentally change our healthcare system. One of these candidates is taking big money in the general. The other one is not.
Does this only apply in the primaries, or will you carry this over to the general election or any other election you'll have going forward?
So this is for primaries. Look, I do not believe in unilateral disarmament. We need to win. We need to win in 2020. And when we hit 2020, and we're in a race against Donald Trump, when we're in a race for control of the Senate and control of the House and in control of the state houses and the governor's mansions, in all of those, the Republicans are going to be bringing a lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of dark money, a lot of super PACs, all to the fight. We played with the same rules. And in that one, I say, We got to be all in.
She unveiled this wonderful plan about, how big money's destroying our politics and corruption is a giant problem. And what she proposed was a very good bill, and what she took was a very good pledge. And she said, I'm not going to take any big money donors. But she said, but I don't believe in unilateral disarmament. So after I'm done not taking big money in the primary, when I get to the general election, I'm going to take big money. Now, let me explain why this is a deal breaker. Because the dynamic that she admits exists is, that's corruption. The influence of big money in politics and corporate money and billionaire money, that's all corruption. Because that's the corporations and the billionaires and the rich folks buying influence, getting politicians to do their bidding because they've given them campaign contributions. So when they make a phone call, the politicians are much more likely to listen and implement the agenda of the rich donors as opposed to the people. She acknowledges that dynamic exists. But she says, in the general, I'm going to partake in it. But if you admit that dynamic exists, it doesn't just magically go away in a general election. So it's like a next level embarrassing of her to make this argument because she's trying to do some weird middle ground to try to say, the left loves me, but also let me virtue signal to the centrists to say, I'm a serious candidate and I'm willing to play by the rules that exist already. So she's trying to do both things at once, but she ends up making herself look ridiculous because you already agreed to the premise that the left has argued all along, which is that big money is a corrupting influence, except all you're saying is, I'm going to take it in the general, but just trust me that it won't affect me in the same way it affects others. But if you agree the dynamic is there, you're not magically above it. And it doesn't magically change in the general because you want it to or because you want to beat Trump. Maybe the way to beat Trump is to be principled. Maybe the way to beat Trump is to actually believe in this left-wing vision and argue for this left-wing vision, and you don't deviate or run to the center or do any goofy things like go back on your principles in order to try to get that outcome. She transferred $10.4 million of the big money she raised a couple years ago into her presidential campaign. Now, she had already made the announcement, I'm not taking any big money in this primary election. But she already raised all the big money in 2018 for 2020 and then just transferred the money. So apparently there are a lot of big donors behind the scenes who are like, wow, you're really full of it. That is an incredibly sleazy trick. And she's been meeting behind the scenes as well, trying to assuage the fears of the Democratic establishment, saying, no. Listen, I'm serious. I'm not like this guy Bernie. And Bernie's kind of hostile with them up front because he doesn't agree with them. And he knows that they're stopping real change in this country. So, not good. Really not good. And then the next one is, she didn't endorse Bernie in 2016. When on paper, ideologically, she agrees a lot more with Bernie Sanders than Hillary Clinton, she didn't endorse Bernie. So what does that tell you? It tells you there are deeper layers of analysis going on where she's kind of embodying that Hillary Clinton line of, I have a public position and a private position. She's willing to play Machiavellian politics. What you see is not what you get. And then why are we supposed to trust you? There were articles about how the Hillary Clinton campaign told Elizabeth Warren, we're going to vet you to potentially be VP. And that may have been their chess move to get her to butt out of the election and not endorse Bernie Sanders. But she didn't have to fall for it. She could have endorsed Bernie Sanders. Now, the argument that's slightly less against Elizabeth Warren here is she thought Bernie had no chance. Therefore, let me just stay out, endorse Hillary in the general, and then maybe, I can influence from within to try to push them in a further left direction. That's the kindest possible interpretation. But either way, she wasn't honest and she wasn't upfront in the 2016 primary, and she didn't endorse somebody who on paper she ideologically agrees much more with. And that's something that a lot of people have never really gotten over. Because it shows you don't really have the courage of your convictions, and you're not as principled as you're acting like you are. Here are the final things, and I think this is really important. This might be the most important, okay? Elizabeth Warren fully embraces the language of bipartisanship as opposed to class struggle. And she also has said stuff, again, on TYT, very damning interview she's done there. She said to Cenk one time, quote, "Allow me to make a spirited defense of Joe Manchin." Here's why this is vitally important. When I interviewed Bernie, I asked him in a very straightforward way, will you use executive orders wherever possible to get your agenda implemented? Regardless of what mainstream media says, they're going to call you a tyrant and a dictator. Regardless of what the Republicans say, they're going to say the same thing. Even many corporate Democrats are going to say, you're using too much executive authority. This is a unitary authoritarian theory that you're operating under. Bernie didn't hesitate, and he said, absolutely, I'm going to do that. The other thing I asked Bernie is, will you support primary challenges against Democrats who are obstructing your agenda, which is the agenda of the American people? Will you actively campaign against and use the bully pulpit against all of these obstructionist Democrats who are going to say, no, I don't want Medicare for all, and I'm going to vote against it, even though 70% of the country is in favor of it and 85% of my own party is in favor of it. I don't care. I'm going to vote against Medicare for all. I'm going to vote against, whatever it may be, fill in the blank, free college, even though 60% of the country wants that as well. I'm going to try to, keep us in all these foreign wars. Will you fight people, even in your own party, politically? He didn't hesitate. He said, absolutely, I'll do that. Not even a question. When Elizabeth Warren says, allow me to make a spirited defense of Joe Manchin, do you think she's going to actively work to primary Joe Manchin? Do you think she's going to know how to apply political pressure to him to either force him to vote for Medicare for all or actively use the bully pulpit against him to get him out of there, and then whoever replaces him can get Medicare for all and vote for Medicare for all? Do you think she's going to do that? The answer, it's not even a question. The answer is 100% absolutely no. Joe Manchin will be able to vote however he wants to vote. He can block Elizabeth Warren's entire left-wing agenda, and she's not going to do anything about it. Guys, we had a president like that. We already had a president like that. And you know what? We got tweaks around the edges. That's the kind of change we got. We didn't get, ironically, she's using this phrase, big structural change. We got minor little tweaks around the edges, which made the system continue to rot, which then led to the rise of a fake populist like Trump. So the only way you're going to advance really any giant, bold, left-wing progressive ideas is to have somebody in there totally unapologetic, willing to use the bully pulpit, willing to throw around his weight, willing to get people engaged, willing to call out members of his own party. So you need somebody who's just a bull in a china shop and who's not, especially up front, given an inch on any of our goals. That candidate's just not Elizabeth Warren. It's just not even close. That candidate's Bernie Sanders. Medicare for all, free college, living wage, end the wars, Green New Deal, eliminate all student loan debt, eliminate all medical debt, actually fight back against the military-industrial complex, who she's actively worked with and helped. They are two drastically different candidates. Now, if you tell me, Kyle, but I don't agree with you in terms of ideology, I think the system we have now is fine. I would only do minor changes to the system we have now. Okay, then Elizabeth Warren's your candidate. I'm not going to argue against you. If that's your ideology, everything we have now is pretty good. Let's do minor tweaks. If that's what you believe, then yes, you absolutely can and should vote for Elizabeth Warren. But if you really believe in getting democratic priorities implemented, the priorities of the people implemented, if you believe in the agenda I just laid out, there is no option. It's Bernie Sanders. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. And again, this is not to say she's not better than other candidates in the race, because she's better than 90% of the other candidates. And we've gone over it on the show in detail. I think that on issues of Wall Street, on issues of taxation, and on issues of trade, she's relatively solid. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, she prodded Obama to get that in there. It returned $12 billion to defrauded Americans, including me. So are there some issues where she has bright spots? Of course. But is she anywhere close, anywhere near to Bernie Sanders, the Michael Jordan of left-wing politics? No. No way. Here, if I could lay it out for everybody in a very simple way, and this is only for people who know basketball. If Bernie is Michael Jordan or LeBron James, Elizabeth Warren is Tracy McGrady. Really solid, pretty good. really impressive at times, but also has 0 rings and is nowhere in the conversation for like greatest ever. So that's my breakdown of that. Nobody take this personally if you're somebody who was leaning in favor of Elizabeth Warren, or if you're somebody who was unsure, or if you're somebody who likes to say, oh, well, one just edges out the other. No, there are pretty solid differences between the two. And I think everybody needs to know that. That's not to say I don't like Elizabeth Warren. That's not to say I don't respect her. That's not to say I don't acknowledge that she's better than 90% of the other candidates, because I do acknowledge all that stuff. But let's stop being silly. Let's stop doing a false equivalence. And let's recognize there was one poll that came out the other day which had Elizabeth Warren beating Bernie Sanders in Iowa. And it was by a substantial margin. Now, that's only one poll, okay? So you can't take too much from it. In other polls, Bernie Sanders is doing very well in Iowa, very well in New Hampshire. But also in the Real Clear Politics average of national polls, Elizabeth Warren has just edged out Bernie Sanders by a couple points. So it's possible we're seeing the beginnings of a trend of Elizabeth Warren rising through the ranks and being an insurgent candidate. Obviously, we all think Biden is fading because he's running a pathetically terrible campaign. So this segment is more important now than ever, because I do think you have plenty of people who are supporting Elizabeth Warren who used to be Bernie supporters, and then they went, okay, now I'm for Elizabeth Warren. And for those people, if they're actually serious about politics and serious about policy and strategy and getting our ideas implemented, you can't go Elizabeth Warren over Bernie Sanders. It just makes no sense.